What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke with our round 4 live stream for the Sanderson Farms Championship. Gonna get you ready for all of your DFS lineups and your underdog and prize picks exposure. But first off, we'll look at the fancy side, a weather report, also some ownership and large field GPPs. We'll go through some stat averages, also shots gained metrics that we have from round 3 in the entire event, all to give you a game plan for your exposure tomorrow. But let's finish this week strong. It's been a fun one here during the fall swing. Not every single week that we have golf exposure to work with. Let's go ahead and take advantage where we can. And if you're happening to catching this live, feel free to go ahead and let me know any questions or deep dives that you got in the chat. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing going. So the scoring average today ended up playing flatter than the first couple days. But as you can see here, it was about 0.05 shots easier in the morning. So unlike days 1 and 2, where it was 0.3 strokes easier in the afternoon, day number 2 was about 0.9 strokes easier in the afternoon wave. It was a little bit more consistent with the wind. And for tomorrow, it looks a little bit more like days 1 and 2, where it was gustier during the morning hours, but they were also calling for that today. So I don't know if we can really count on that. So when you take a look at this forecast, closer to 26 miles an hour of wind gusts in the morning. Sustained winds are about 2 to 3 miles an hour in the higher in the morning as well. So I could see the afternoon conditions being slightly more favorable, but the main thing for Sunday Showdown purposes are going to be the placement points. Starting in the top 20 is a huge advantage for tomorrow because you're getting rewarded based on your finishing position, unlike rounds 2 and 3. So even if we had an edge that was favoring the morning side, it's not like we could go all in on that sort of thing when we have that factor in the large field contest. So if anything, this makes the placement points even more important than usual. I'm forcing in at least 3 or 4 guys starting in that top 25 so that I can get at least 2 of the top 5, probably 3 or even 4 of that top 10, and then maybe 1 to 2 other players for that differentiation. But if I'm in a single entry or if I'm in a contest like a cash contest, it might even be all 5 or 6 players going off late. And that's because of the reliance on those placement points, but also because the weather's better on that side as well. So that's what we're looking at. The weather today, a little bit flatter, but if with the round 1 and round 2 track record, could be a little bit more substantial for tomorrow. So the next thing we'll go through would be the ownership at the top end of the board, where we're going to have everyone that's in the top 10 posted. And like you'd imagine with those placement points, going to be a lot at the top end of the leaderboard. And Garrett Higa, who's in first place, is nearly 40%. Very predictable, but stuff that we're going to have to navigate with a lot of those top 5, top 10 players also being guys that you're likely going to have in lineup. So we'll talk about that, how to handle that, and how many of these players that you should be using. What's going on, Noah? One of the sweaty tryhards that we've seen in, I think, every single live stream so far. Let's have ourselves a slate. And yeah, hit me up with any questions that you have, man. But the ownership up top isn't as wacky as round number 3. Round 3, with all those guys that missed the cut, you had, I think, 6, even 7 players that were 30% plus owned. For tomorrow, it's only 1. It's Garrett Higa at that 38% mark. Taylor Montgomery, extremely chalky, $8,200. I got him at about 28%. Same thing with a Max Homa at $9,300. And then you start to see your guys like a Steven Fisk in the 7K range popping at -16. A Matt Kuchar at $7,800. He's popping with that -14 scorecard. The players that are in contention for those top 5 points are going to be jammed in by the rest of the field. So a few of these guys should be in every lineup that you're using. The important part is getting a few of the guys with placement point potential that are just outside of that top 10. And that's why when I was mentioning playing, a few guys towards the top end of the board, I mentioned the top 25 rather than the top 10. I think people focus far too much on the people that are starting in that top 5 rather than people that have an opportunity to move into that top 5. Because when you go down into the dark abyss that you see down here of the players that are in that 10 to 20 range with the top end owned plays, those guys are a lot more reasonable. You've got players in the 10 to 17% range that have just as much, maybe not as much top 5, top 10 equity, but very close to the same kind of top 10 equity as the players up top that still have to shoot something like -3, -4 to get to that optimal lineup. And I think people also forget the fact that this is an easy golf course. -2.5, -3 scoring average means that if you're going to finish top 5, you can't just shoot even par. You can't just, make 3 birdies and shoot like a -1 round. To get to the optimal lineup, you're going to have to make 6, 7 birdies, probably shoot -4, -5, and get those top 5, top 10 placement points on top of that. So that's why I like going a little bit further down the board. These projections are from my Patreon page. So if you guys want to see the entire spreadsheet, who those, number 10 through number 20 players are going to be, you guys can find those over there. They're already posted for all of my members. But what we're going to focus on next, on top of the ownership, and I guess that's worth pointing out who some of these players are. I mean, we mentioned the Homa, we mentioned the Whaleys up top, the Steven Fiss. But it's the rest of the top 10, as you'd expect, like your Tom Kims, your Eric Coles at $8,100, your Rasmus and your Christian Bezainhoots, you have to worry about from that ownership perspective. But after we go through ownership, let's talk about how the heck you figure out who to play, which is similar to rounds 2 and 3, but to add place and point potential on top of that. So we're still going to go through the shots gained metrics, find some ball striking poppers and short game regression candidates. Max Homa had the big short game regression day today. That was vital to a lot of my exposure. Course history, high upside are still mixed in for a lot of my leverage options. But down here, you can see the placement point tab. That's where a lot of these players are coming in because, I'll be getting to some chalkier players with these top 4 categories, but a lot of times I need to add even more players starting in the top 5, top 10, just to make sure I'm getting enough placement points. And that's as a 150 max player. I play a ton of lineups, so I really need to have some guys towards the top. So that's why, and that's the way that I make sure that I get to that. So that's a little bit different than the first couple worth noting for Sunday. Let's go through some shots gained metrics. And it looks like we got my guy Philbo in chat as well. Cheers to you. I'm just sipping on water over here myself, but maybe we'll get some whiskey later on. Who knows? We haven't had that much whiskey here in 2025, but it's been calling my name recently. I like myself some good whiskey. I don't drink any of that crap shit, but maybe some Blanton's. Maybe I'll pull some of that out. We'll see. Let's get this going. So in terms of the shots gained metrics, we're going to start the same way we did the first couple days, and that would be with the ball striking stats. So off the T plus approach, trying to figure out who's hitting the ball the best, and that is something that is relatively consistent from day to day. So a Trey Molinax, a Doc Redman, a Thorbjorn Olesen all really stood out there. First things first, Doc Redman, love to see that he's finally playing well. I hope he can keep it up on Sunday, but recently has not shown us that track record. So I'm personally probably going to be avoiding him, fading him for tomorrow, especially because he's a little bit higher rounds than he should be because of his T14 position. But we'll definitely be rooting for him outside of my DFS exposure. But players like a Seamus Power, a Pearson Cutie, a Thomas Rosenmuller, oh, geez, I was about to butcher that name, a Rio Hisatuni, a Matt Kuchar, are all players that are in the top 10 of shots gained to ball striking that are worthy of a little bit of a bump. And you like the first couple rounds, this top 5, top 10 will be played a little bit more by the masses. But when you go down just past that, and it's kind of similar to when looking at the placement points and trying to find some of the sneakier options, I like doing that with this ball striking as well. So when we get down to like the Venturas, the Hodges, the Patrick Fishburns, Postons, Whitings, and Clantons, these are almost all players that I'm using in my player pool because they were playing decent enough to gain in both of those ball striking categories. And in a lot of cases, not in every case, but in a lot of the different players that we just went through, they were guys that were average or really into the negative with the shots gained around the green and putting. So we'll mention that short game regression here, which is the other side of that coin. It's just like ball striking can be consistent from day to day. The short game here is the exact opposite. It is extremely variant from round to round. So when we look at the guys that gained a whole bunch of strokes putting, it's not really something that we can count on happening every single day. And a prime example of that is Max Homa, who, as you could see there, was number 1 in shots gained putting today. Well, what did he do the day before? He lost 3.3 strokes putting. He was one of the worst that we had in the entire field. So if that doesn't show you the kind of variance that you can have from day to day, I don't know what will. So all of these guys here that are into the dark green, it's not like they're unplayable. I mean, I'm playing Rasmus. I'm playing Matt Kuchar for my lineups for tomorrow. There are going to be exceptions to the rule here. But if they're marginal, they weren't players that you were prioritizing for another reason, then yeah, maybe that red flag is a reason to jump ship and not play one of these guys. Whereas if we go to the players that lost a whole bunch of strokes in these putting categories, like a Jesper Svensson, he not only lost strokes putting, but also 1.7 strokes around the green. That feels highly unlikely to happen in back-to-back days. And in fact, even if Jesper is just an even and neutral to the field in both of those categories, that's nearly a 6-shot difference from day to day. And a JT Poston is normally an extremely good putter, especially on Bermuda grass. He lost 4 strokes putting. He could be tomorrow's Max Homa, right? If he goes out there and gains 3-4 strokes putting, I don't think that would really surprise anyone. A Thurston Lawrence, he had been decent putting the first couple of days. Now he lost over 3 strokes there. Also a candidate to pull a Max Homa from round to round. But not every single player here is somebody that you should be jamming into lineups. But if they were okay ball striking, so with this off the tee and approach, if they were into the positive or even, half a stroke negative or 0.7 strokes negative, like you see here with the Jesper Svensson, then they might be worthy of a few looks. Not so much when it's an Anders Albertson who lost almost 2 strokes ball striking, Kevin Streelman who lost 1.5, a Rafael Campos who also lost over 1.5 strokes between those two categories. When it's a little bit more realistic, and especially on the guys that were gaining off the tee and on approach, those are players that you're going to see funneling their way into my player pool. So that's how I use the round 3 stats. It's not really different than what we had in rounds 1 and 2. But what is different for Sunday, by the way, still looking at course history, still looking at those high upside players. I know you guys saw those tags on my spreadsheet. Those are still a part of my player pool as well. But I also do look at the 54-hole stuff. So the first 3 rounds, everything that we've seen so far, especially when I'm trying to get those placement point players. And, that's that last category, that pink one that we had at the bottom, where I'm trying to take guys that are starting in the top 10, top 20. And what I'm looking for are ball striking heavy players and not guys that have gained like 5 to 6 strokes putting. So Garrick Higgo, somebody that I'm fading in my Sunday exposure, he's gained over 7, almost 8 strokes between the around the green and the putting. You have a Danny Walker who's gained 8 strokes putting. Like, I'm fading him. There's no chance I'll play a guy like that. A Taylor Montgomery who's gained almost 10 strokes between the short game categories. Like, that's not really something that you're going to see me getting behind. A Vince Whaley, about 8 strokes between the short game categories, or 7 strokes. Wow. Mental math wasn't too strong on that one, huh? Frankie Sapin, who's gained 9 strokes in just his putting alone. Like, that's not something that I'll be using for Sunday. But what I will be getting behind are these guys with the shots gained ball striking that are standing out a little bit more. Like, I guess a Garrick Higgo, you can't sleep on him. He does have a good ball striking week going, but also a bit short game dependent. But there's where Max Homa stands out. Matt Kuchar, who I told you guys I was playing before. That's why I'm still using them, despite them being, sub-ideal with some of the round 3 metrics that we were looking at before, is because over the whole 54-hole sample size, the larger sample, they're some of the best players that we have in the field. And you could say that about Eric Cole. Erasmus Højgaard is gaining strokes ball striking to the field. And a lot of these guys up here are. That's why they're starting towards the top end of the board. But I don't want those to be the guys that are like 5-6 strokes into the gaining with the putter. And I guess that's the case with the Eric Cole. He's 5.4 strokes putting. Same thing with Tom Kim, also a little bit putter dependent. So as you can see, there's a lot of fade candidates towards the top end of the board if you're looking at some of that short game. So I would say that 10th to 20th range, again, that range that's also lower owned, is, I think, the absolute nuts, because scroll down and look at this. It's not a sea of dark green with the putting, right? It's a lot more reasonable putting in around the green stats, and a lot of dark green with the ball striking. And also they're lower owned. They still have that top 5, that top 10 potential. I mean, they're starting at just a stroke or 2 out of that top 10. So they obviously have a chance to move into that with a good round tomorrow. And they have the much more sustainable shots gained profile. So I think we could see a little bit of a flipping of the leaderboard. Not only do they have the better stat profiles, but these guys up top are playing with more pressure, being closer to the lead. I'm going to be hammering, and a lot of these guys are already in my player pool. So like a Seabez is here. Thorbjørn Olesen really fits that kind of stat profile. Doug Gim as well. You can see over 6 strokes tee to green with both of those 2 players. Trey Molnax over 6 strokes tee to green for the event. A Doc Redman, a Pearson Cootie is one, almost 8 strokes tee to green so far, are all players that I think are worthy of a few extra looks. So let me see if there's any player pool deep dives that you guys have got for me. If not, we're going to go through some stat averages. You said, is Poston primed to go low tomorrow? You said you think he is. I'll be playing him because of that short game regression, and he's the player that, like Max Homa, lost 3 strokes putting. It could potentially turn that into gaining 3 strokes the next day. If he does that, and then he's gaining this 3 strokes tee to green, that's one of the nutted performances. That is like a -7, a -8 round. So he's got it within his range of outcomes. We know what has to happen. It has to be that putter that gets red hot for him. But if somebody's going to do so, and he hasn't been as good putting recently as he historically is, but if we go to his profile and we just take a look at his shots gained putting over the last, 6 to 12 months, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's not every week he's into the dark green, but 5 strokes putting, 3.5, 5, 4.4, 3.5 strokes putting. We get a day where he's gaining 2 or maybe 3 strokes into the positive, and book it. He's going to be somebody that you absolutely have to have. So I'm using him towards the top. Michael Thorbjornsen, he's a high upside player that I'll be mixing in at lower ownership. And that's what I'm doing instead of Garrick Higgo. Instead of playing that 30, 40% owned option, in single entries, he might be 50% owned in some cases. I'm going with guys that fit the stat profile of what I'm looking for, but that aren't going to be nearly as highly owned as what you see with him there. And let's go through some prop stuff. So on the underdog prize pick side, we were a 0.5 hook away from hitting on our slip. That was, of course, posted over on X/Twitter. So that was a little bit disappointing, but did profit on our round 3 prop. So can't complain too much from our exposure from that angle. So let's try and run it back for Sunday. And for the free prop and the free slip on Twitter, let's try and run that back as well. So if you're looking for the exposure that we're playing on Sunday, that will be posted over there. We're not going to have boards to go through quite yet at this hour on underdog or prize picks, but I will be posting something for a community tail over there. Sites did have a question. He said, is Cootie for a repeat performance? He said he was the last one out in your player pool you left out. So yeah, he was somebody that I used, was checking a lot of the boxes. It feels like chasing that's your thought process is he going to repeat that? If you're going through the stats and they're checking the boxes that you're looking for on Sunday, then by all means, he makes sense at about average ownership. He's not low owned anymore. He was super low owned for round 3. Essentially, nobody was using him out there. Tomorrow, he's going to be closer to that 5 to 10% ownership range in most contests. So if he's checking the boxes for you, by all means, you can play him. He's not going to be that 15 to 20% owned player that you have to worry about from the ownership angle, but it feels like chasing. If your only reasoning for using him would be the fact that he played well today. Just speaking of, I guess I'll show you the stat profile on him, at least from round number 3. So round 3, gained ball striking, free strokes to the field, and was about a neutral putting. So for my process, right, with evaluating Pearson Cootie, he sets up extremely well heading into round 4. I have no issues throwing him back out there, but just, don't let the FOMO be the reason that you're using him for Sunday, because golf's a sport where you have those ebbs and flows. People have their highs and then their lows the very next day. I mean, you see that with a Max Homa would be probably the most extreme example of that today, but every round that happens. So that's why I don't like chasing my tail too much. But if the stat profile is okay, I can get behind that for sure. Let's go through these averages from round number 3. So at the DP World Tour, if you guys didn't catch that, they did not even play round 3. The weather was so bad. They finished round 2, and then the weather got so crappy about 9 local time there that they had to call play for the entire day. So tomorrow, they're going to be playing round number 3. I already have a couple bets in for matchups that I've already put in. I'll throw those out there. I don't know if sportsbooks are even going to let you bet them at this point because of the fact that it's so far delayed, but I'll at least tell you who I bet to see if you can find that on like DraftKings, Hard Rock, or some of the other sports books out there. But here's what we've got for the Sanderson Farms. We're going to have a board for that. I'll probably be posted in the next hour and a half, 2 hours. And then again, for that community tail, it'll be on my X/Twitter. But scoring average got a lot easier than rounds 1 and 2. And that's exactly what we called for in this live stream. Not only were the pin locations going to be set up a little bit simpler for moving day, but we also had the cut line at a weaker field event like this. And at any PGA Tour event, you have a cut, you're going to get better performances for rounds 3 and 4 just by default. I mean, you're getting the crappy players out of there. You're having the guys that are in form playing the best golf only in the field for rounds 3 and 4. But we're not when we're at a weak field event like this, when we're not in the heat of the schedule like we have during the summer. We have even worse players towards the bottom, guys that aren't even on the PGA Tour that are teeing it up. So when we have that cut line action, it's going to make a drastic impact on that scoring average. So that's why I went from like -1.5, -1.8 to this -2.6. The one thing I will say is that the pin locations should be harder for tomorrow. They were extremely easy today. There were no real bogey pin locations on the golf course. The hard holes were in spots where you can get up and down from pretty much any sort of miss. I'm not expecting it to be nearly as easy for Sunday. And I think they've been posting the pin locations at 8 p.m. Eastern time. We're not going to go through those here on the live stream, but just assuming that they're going to be harder pin locations, I think that's a very safe assumption to be made. Just like assuming the pin locations were going to be easier for round number 3. These averages should probably go a little bit in the worst direction. So, for example, with strokes, it'll probably be closer to like a -2.25 under par, maybe -2 if they really stretch it with the golf course setup. Your birdie average, maybe it goes back down to 4 per round, like you saw in round number 2. Your bogey average, that probably goes up to at least 1.75, maybe the whole way up to 2 per round. But your fairway and your green averages, this is where you're not going to see nearly as much movement. I mean, the fairway average has been at 7.4 for pretty much the entire week. Your green regulation average will probably stay in the 12.75 to 13 range for Sunday as well. So that should give you a pretty decent idea of what to go for in your prop exposure. And what I found some success with today were some strokes unders. I mean, you saw that with the Kevin Yu prop that we posted on X/Twitter, but I also took it with Michael Thorbjornsen on the under in 70. And we had Steven Yeager for the over at 4.5 birdies. And that was probably something you could have foreseen if you were watching the live stream for round 3. We mentioned that any of the elite tier players or elite tier birdie makers that we could get at 4.5, I'd be slamming their over. That was the idea with Yeager, who did end up actually hooking us today. So unfortunate on that sort of lean, but I will take that 100% of the time again. And if they post it again, even if this average does go down to like 4 per round, the average for your elite tier players, your guys like Geiger, your top 50 birdie makers on the PGA Tour, is 4.5 to 4.75 per round. And if we're finding a guy who's maybe due for some short game regression, or that was hitting the ball well off the tee on approach for his round 2 and 3 performance, those are the kind of guys that you're going to see me playing for overs on Sunday. So that'd be an over on birdies. Again, 4.5 for any elite tier players. I'm going to be line shopping those. And then at 69.5, that's where we got guys like Kevin. You posted some of your top 5, top 10 players that we have after the cut line. You give me a top 5, a top 10 player at that 69.5, somebody with reasonable shots gained metrics as well, you're going to see me trying to take some unders. But it's all depending on the pricing, right? These sports books could go way overhand, post guys at 69, 68.5 strokes for all we know. If they do that, then it's going to be fade central. If they go the other direction, they think it's going to get way harder with the Sunday setup, and they post a whole bunch of guys at like 70.5 strokes, then it's going to be slamming a whole bunch of unders. So it really does depend on the pricing that we're going to get. But the pricing's been pretty similar for all the rounds so far. They haven't done that much movement from day to day. Assuming that it's looking similar, again, pricing some of the elite tier 4.5s, and then some 69.5, some 70 unders on players that are playing sustainable golf. And, going back to the shots gained metrics, we are going through that from round number 3. You can use that for your prop analysis as well. That's something that I do quite often with my analysis, is trying to find the guys that can take it from round to round or maybe do some putting regression, especially with birdie or better stats. Getting the ball in the hole, going over that 4.5 line, a lot of times just comes down to getting lucky with a 15 to 20 footer once or twice during the round. Somebody like a Max Homa that lost 3 strokes the day before would have been a great target for props for like an over on birdies the next day because of that putting regression aspect. So that's something that I use to try and find some plays on. For example, with Kevin Yu, he was somebody that I was looking for a little bit of approach regression for heading into today's round. I'll be doing that for my Sunday exposure as well. So for all the prop slips I'm taking, you guys can find those on my Patreon page. We will have one being posted for free, of course, on my X/Twitter as well. So in the description, you guys can find a link to that. That's where I'll be posting a slip. And it was a 2-man for today. It was a 4-man the day before that. So I don't know. It depends on the kind of value that we have, how many legs we're going to end up going with, but something to go out there and tail for your Sunday. So exposure will be posted. But on top of that, anything else will be posted on my Patreon page, including all the Hard Rock Better matchups that I end up playing. The DP World Tour stuff, because I've already entered those. I will mention that. It was Patrick Reed versus John Perry. It was a head-to-head. I got that at minus 120, so close to even money, which is a ridiculous line, by the way. Patrick Reed is just a way better player than John Perry. And I like Perry. I'm a DP World Tour slut. You guys know that. And he's one of my guys from the DP World Tour. But even then, Patrick Reed just laps him in terms of talent level. And then the other one was Daniel Brown. It was an obscure player. Daniel Brown versus Clement Sordet. And that one was, I believe, minus 110 towards Brown. It might have been like minus 120, something in that range. Once again, Brown, much better player than Sordet. He's gaining like 0.5 strokes per round over his last 50. That would be Daniel Brown. Sordet, on the other hand, is losing about 0.5 strokes per round on the DP World Tour. So a couple matchups that you might want to see if they're available on the books. Unfortunately, because of the delay and because of the uncertainty with the tee times and whatnot, they might not even have those posted anymore. Those were posted on my Patreon page, and you were able to tail those if you're a member over there. Another example of why joining the Patreon page is a great example or a great idea. You can obviously get every single piece of exposure I'm entering and all these stat averages and all the weather reports that I'm posting for my members. It's giving you all the information, all the kind of research tools that you need to go out there and break down a slate. And it's not just a page where, you go out there, you tail exposure, a touch, so it all go out there, play this, play that. I'm a huge proponent of tailing what you believe in, what you agree with on my plays. That's why I always give the reasoning on my plays before you go out there and tail them for yourself, so that not only can you learn from that, try and find value for yourself and figure out where pros are finding value on these prop boards, but also so you know whether you want to tail it for yourself, or you can read the write-up, you can see whether it's enough value for you to go out there and mix in yourself. That's what my Patreon page is all about. On top of that, I have the spreadsheet from before as well with all the projections for round number 4. Every single Showdown slate is posted over there. Also main slate for all of these golf tournaments, player pull tags showing the why on every single play as well. So not only do you know who I'm playing for any given round, but also the exact reasoning behind it. And it's the same idea with the prop stuff, right? you shouldn't just know who to play. You should know the reasoning behind it so that you can find your own place for yourself and to eventually be doing it all on your own, right? That's the idea with my page, is to make you a better player of DFS, a better overall, so that you don't have to have memberships. You don't have to have coaching perpetually to go out there and find results. You can catch your own fish, right? I'd rather teach you how to fish than just give you fish for one night. And that's our mantra around here. But that's all, guys. I appreciate your support on the channel as per usual. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already. And if you're new around here, you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do so as well, so you don't miss any of the content to come. That'll include all the content for all the fall series events here during the next couple weeks, and all the football for the next couple weeks as well. We've got Showdown previews for football posted, also main slate previews over there. Speaking of, we got a main slate tomorrow night, so make sure to check out my preview posted for that if you're a football player and playing Draftkings lineups for the 10-game slate, I think, that we have for Sunday, as well as for the rest of the season there. But that's all I've got. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you guys for all the content next week.